everyone, and happy Friday. It is another Mavens of Manufacturing Day, and we are the broadcast series that showcases the powerful women in engineering and manufacturing from the shop floor all the way to the C-suite who are really setting the standards for modern manufacturing. I'm really super excited today because we have Katie Armstrong. She is tuning in from Montana. Welcome, Katie. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. Yeah, we have some fresh snow on the ground, so I'm feeling good about that. How are you doing?
I'm not a snow person. Like, I like watching it fall, but to actually be in it, it's really cold in Wisconsin. I don't know if you guys have that type of cold where when you walk outside, it just kind of breaks your face, or if it's a little more mild. But yeah, I don't like the snow. I do like snow activities though. So as long as I'm doing something, I'm happier. But if I'm not doing anything, I don't really like it. But
Yeah.
I heard Montana's beautiful. I've always wanted to go there, so I'm a little bit jealous that you live there. So I definitely need to schedule a visit there. But
Yes, you should.
we are here to talk about you and your company. So can you just, to start off the conversation, and to anyone who's tuning in, be sure to drop where you're coming from in the comments section. And as our conversation progresses, if you have a question for Katie, don't be shy to ask that question or provide some comments. But Katie, can you provide us some background information about yourself? Like, how did you end up in manufacturing, and what are some of the things that you're doing today?
Yeah, so I kind of started my career as a chemical engineer. I graduated with degrees in chemistry and physics, kind of figured out too late in school that I wanted to be a chemical engineer, so I kind of became one by trade. So I started out working at a really small ink manufacturing company, and that was kind of where I got my first experience and intro into working with operators on the floor and performing process improvements and just generally making processes better and passing on the first try and all that good stuff. And then from there, I worked in both the automotive and semiconductor industries, really all in chemical manufacturing. So I did plastics extrusion in the automotive industry, and then I did photoresist manufacturing in semiconductor. And so I've kind of worked all across. I've worked as a process engineer, manufacturing engineer, working directly with the process. And then I've also worked as a supplier quality engineer. So working with contract manufacturers, suppliers, and then also kind of managing supply chain for the whole country at one point. And so I've had kind of a wide breadth of experience talking to operators on the floor, and then also, leaders and executives. And so I think that experience has let me see a lot of different perspectives throughout manufacturing companies.
Yeah, you've been all over the place. That's really cool. But I feel like if you have that engineering background, you really have like a superpower and can basically do anything in engineering and manufacturing. It doesn't take that long for you to pick up things or be trained on something. So that's the common denominator that I'm finding with engineering. So if you want to get involved with a lot of stuff, engineering may be the place for you. You now are doing this thing though with ArmstrongLin Optimal Solutions. That's your company, and you have a partner in that company. So can you tell us what ArmstrongLin is and how that even came to fruition? Like, what was going on in the sector, and how did the conversation start between you and your business partner to really create this business?
Yeah, good question. My business partner and I have a pretty funny origin story. So we actually met in a marketing class, and we had our marketing professor who we still keep in touch with because she's awesome. Shout out to Professor Donlin if you're watching. But we were in class and we kind of were working on a group project together, and we were getting along pretty well. And we obviously got distracted at one point, just started talking about our lives during the group project. And we're talking about how a lot of companies just really don't focus on, listening to their employees. And like, if they just listened, then probably a lot of their big problems would be solved if they were able to kind of engage their employees more. And something that was interesting about that conversation, and we both worked for big corporate companies at the time. And so, we're both kind of experiencing the same thing. And one thing that was interesting about that conversation was that I'm coming from this like big manufacturing operations background, and then my business partner is in corporate finance. So completely different area of the company, but we were kind of experiencing the same problems. So we kind of figured out that we work well together, we get along well, we kind of see eye to eye on a lot of things. And so we just decided to start this consulting business. And originally we were like, it could be a side hustle, if it doesn't work out, it's fine, we'll just keep our day jobs. But it did work out, and I'm doing it full time now. And really our focus is to help companies improve their operations, improve their long-term planning. And I think we have a really unique view because we have those two sides, the operations side and the finance side, which normally those people don't ever talk to each other in a company or don't make an effort to listen to each other. So I think the fact that we've come together on that gives us a really unique perspective and way of looking at things that can really propel companies forward.
I just feel like that's a weird situation where those two sides wouldn't be talking to each other because they're related in a way where it's both needed for the success of the company. It's kind of like that division between sales and marketing or sales and engineering. Like, why is there any division in like they all are part of the wheel that spins to make things successful? So, well, one of the I think interesting things about what you're doing too is the corporate culture, right? So I've been part of a lot of conversations involving startups. I was part of a startup company, and there's a lot, like I like to compare it, and here's me doing sports analogies, which I hate, but it's the only thing that comes to mind. But with college football, right? Like a lot of the players are really passionate. They're not really concerned about the money portion yet. Like they all play with their heart out, and then by the time they make it to the NFL, it seems like there's this mind shift change with the money aspect. And I feel like that's kind of similar with what happens with smaller companies that turn corporate, and they tend to forget the human side of things in corporations, which can be a really bad thing. Some companies are just so big that they don't, it comes across as they don't care and everybody's a number instead of a human being. So can you start by telling us what humanizing the corporate world means to you, and how does it differentiate from traditional corporate culture?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing, and I guess if I were to kind of explain it in a nutshell, it really just comes down to bottom up management versus top down. And I think this is where a lot of corporate companies struggle because they take this top down approach, which is all kind of tied to their goals, right? Like the executives will get some large overarching goal, like, okay, reduce inventory costs by 10%, for example. And then it's their job to figure out how to do that and how to pass that initiative down to the different levels and then come up with some new process or new initiative or new rules or whatever it is that they decide to do, and then push that down to what will eventually be the ground floor employees. And then I know I've experienced this. I don't know if anyone listening has experienced this, but usually by the time it gets to you, the ground floor employee, the initiative makes no sense, or it causes more issues than it solves, right? I'm sure lots of people have had that experience. I know I have. And so the difference there is that, yes, it's a big corporation, right? Like you're going to have to achieve these big initiatives somehow. It's a necessary part of a big corporation continuing to run. But if you shift your mindset to more of a bottom up, you can still have that same goal, like reduce 10% of inventory costs. But if you take the approach of going to your ground floor employees first, the ground floor employees are the experts on the details, right? So I know, like from my experience as a supplier quality engineer, if you asked me what raw materials could we safely cut down without causing any problems, I could give you a list of like 50 raw materials just off the top of my head, right? When you're working at that level, you know all the details of the process. So it's actually more useful to collect as many details as possible from the people who actually have their hands in the process, and then funnel that up to middle management and say, okay, what's the common denominator here, right? Like maybe it's a certain supplier or maybe it's something else, but it should be the middle management's job to find the common denominator and then figure out what resource needs to be applied or what initiative needs to be applied to, achieve that initiative essentially. And then the executive's job should be to provide that resource or figure out how to provide that resource. And so it really comes down to when you switch your mindset to more of an empowering and like gather as much information as possible and then filter rather than trying to make a decision with no information and then dealing with the consequences. Shifting that mindset, I think, really can help corporations, even big ones.
And can you like offer your opinion on, because I know that, and I feel like anyone who's been on the shop floor or the ground floor, they know why this is really important for manufacturing companies. But can you provide your opinion on why this is especially important for manufacturing companies to have a people first approach today?
Yeah, I think well, it's important for a few reasons. I mean, I guess the big one is just that, manufacturing is really experiencing a lot of turnover right now. It's hard to hold on to people. It's hard to keep skilled work. And particularly in manufacturing, there's so much knowledge that goes into operators and what they do. And can take a really long time to specialize in a certain process, and it's not necessarily transferable across industries like some other roles. So if you have someone at your company that is really specialized, you want to hang on to them. It will be really
Yeah.
expensive to lose them. So I think this approach can help with that, with retention, because I think people want to work for a company where they feel heard and they don't just kind of feel like they're being flung around by the whims of leadership, so to speak. But I think particularly in manufacturing too, it helps because there's a lot of things that you wouldn't necessarily know if you weren't actually on the floor. And I think this is also kind of unique to manufacturing, right? I mean, there's simple things like you want to add a new piece of equipment, and then when you add the new piece of equipment, it disrupts somebody's route that they take to go get their raw materials and adds an extra 30 minutes to their process, right?
Yeah.
That's something that you're not going to learn in business school. Like, that's something that you're not going to learn to look out for unless you are actually an operator. And those types of physical barriers and things like that are something that I think is also, kind of unique to manufacturing.
Yeah. Frank chimed in. Oh, I love your profile, Frank. Your picture. That's awesome. One of the first things I always like to do is actually take the line workers to breakfast or lunch, and they will pretty much tell you everything that's wrong or broken, but they often feel like they never get listened to. I've been a part of a lot of companies that, some of the employees just basically gave up, and they had a mindset of, well, it's just a job. It's
Mm-hmm.
just work. So that's why I'm showing up every day. And you really don't want that kind of attitude, because again, that's going to affect your retention. Eventually they might find something better and decide to leave. So one of the things that you just said too about the operators and how they have to run their routine and walk around the floor, that's part of inclusivity, right? It's when people hear inclusivity, I think what happens is we immediately go to like gender, ethnicity, and that's not all that inclusivity is about. It's also about mindsets and how people think and neurodiversity and, the diets of some employees. Like not everybody's a vegetarian, but some people are. So it's thinking about those small details to really incorporate an inclusive environment. So from your job and your work, what are some of the biggest challenges companies are facing when trying to create inclusive work environments? And then can you share some strategies or any kind of case studies that you have that have proven effective in fostering inclusivity and really helping with retention rates?
Yeah, so I think really the thing that people struggle with the most is I think a lot of companies have a handle on the fact that you need to at some point listen to your employees' ideas, right? Like, this person mentioned taking someone out for breakfast and listening to them, and I think that's a really great first step. But I think where companies sometimes struggle is translating those ideas into effective change. So it's one thing to kind of listen to people and understand where they're coming from. But if you don't actually take action to change something based on what that person said, then yeah, it will probably still feel like they're not really being listened to. It might feel like they're kind of just being indulged, which is maybe not as good of a feeling. So I think it's really important to translate what people are telling you into effective change. And that was something that I got an opportunity to do during my time as a process engineer. And I think it can be a really cool and empowering part of being an engineer, because you are kind of that middle ground between the operators and the managers. So it kind of puts you in a unique position to kind of affect change at your company. And I think some examples is that especially when I worked in the automotive industry with plastics extrusion, there were a lot of operators there that had been there for like 30 years, right? So they're total experts on this process. Like they know way more than I will ever forget about that process. And so I always just ask them, like, okay, we're having this problem. I know you know what's going on, so just tell me. And like, I will deal with the administrative side of things, right? Because engineers have to operate within, especially in the automotive industry, these very strict quality standards, which are there for a reason, right? You're making something that potentially affects someone's life. So it's important to have those in place. But I think, operators aren't set up to go through those systems to actually make a change themselves. So it's important for you as the engineer to hear what they're saying and then actually change whatever it is. So like in my case, it was the extrusion recipe, right? They would say something, or they would say, oh, something's coming in this way from the supplier. And then I, as the engineer, would go to the supplier and figure out what the problem was and actually make a change. And I found that actually taking that extra step to make a change to the process, go through the management of change process at your company, bring it up to leadership, explain to leadership why this change is going to bring about a lower risk process or a more efficient process. If you go through those steps and that effort, when the operators actually see that the change has been made based on what they said, that is a huge step towards building trust. And after I kind of established that, I always went for an easy win right when I started, because I knew that if I could show them like, hey, I'm someone that actually will change things based on what you say, then that just builds such a great rapport. And I was always able to just go to them and they would tell me what was going on. And I was able to solve, a lot of problems at that company because I had that great rapport with the operators. So it really does make a difference, taking that extra step to actually put effort into making a change, even if it might be hard or annoying for you. It's a small investment that will help you a lot in the long run.
Yeah. I feel like though there should be some things for even the executives to do, because and I just had this conversation with someone that's close to me where they're shutting down the night shift at their facility plant, and they're moving all the night shifters to another facility that's like down the road. And they had like a shift meeting and they basically said, this is what's happening, and kind of were politicians about it, where they weren't giving like really detailed answers to their questions, and basically just saying indirectly like, this is how it is and this is how it's going to be, and you either have to deal with it or do something else. And I feel like that doesn't make employees feel motivated to change with how things change. So like some of these employees don't even want to go to the new facility because it's like, well, if you're not going to explain to us why this is happening and if it's permanent, then why should we be excited to go to this new facility and keep doing what you're asking us to do? So is there anything that like the top level executives can do to really gain that trust as well? I know Frank mentioned that he took some of his operators out for lunch or breakfast or something, and I'm hoping he's not doing that out of his own pocket. But I do feel like there are managers that will take that extra step of paying things out of their own pocket just so that they can build that rapport. Is there something where like upper management or even executives can maybe like help Frank in that situation where like, hey, let's put this in our budget and give our middle managers like the money to do this so that we can build that rapport? Have you have any suggestions for that?
Yeah. I think, things like that are helpful. But I honestly think the biggest thing is just transparency. So like in that story that you told, I think beyond like taking someone out to breakfast or something like that, being a transparent manager, I think is going to help you more than anything else. Because I think sometimes executives have this need to, maybe it's like seated in some need to have control or appear like you're in control, and that can lead to vagueness because they don't want to say when they don't know something or they don't know what's going to happen. But I actually think it can help you a lot more as a manager if you do just say, hey, I don't know how long this change is happening, right? Like we have to try it. Maybe there's some factor that you're looking for, like some efficiency metric that you're looking for that you're like, I don't know, like if we hit it, then we'll keep doing this. Otherwise we might move back. But just being honest about that and being honest about the fact that you don't know, I think will actually gain you a lot of respect as opposed to trying to be vague, because people are going to know that you don't know what's going on regardless, right? Like regardless of whether you decide to share that with them or not, they will figure it out, right? And so it's better to just be upfront about it, because then at least you're a person with integrity and people feel that they can come to you with their concerns and that you'll actually listen and take them seriously, and maybe try to change something. And also, I think it's helpful to go ahead of time, right? Like, I think in this situation, probably the leader should have gone to them and been like, hey, we're thinking about shutting down the night shift. Like, it's probably going to happen. What can I do for you to ease that transition, right? Like, I know this is going to be a huge shakeup in your schedule. Like, what do you need from me to make that easier? And maybe there is some funds that go into that, right? Like, maybe you give people a day off to adjust their sleep schedules or something as simple as that. But I think just being upfront, transparent about it is going to gain you a lot of respect, which also is going to keep retention, because it's tough out there. It's tough to find managers that you respect. So you tend to want to stay.
It definitely, well, and I remember working at a cutting tool manufacturer in the shipping department, and I respected the leads that were on the shop floor more upper management, because they were just straight shooters and they were just like knew the answers to a lot of the things. And then, when upper management didn't answer those questions, they were like, yeah, I don't know why they're not answering it. So it really helps with the culture on the shop floor. And when people are happier on the shop floor, they're just more productive. And in my experience, Frank said sometimes you do what you have to do, just like teachers. I 100% agree with that, Frank. They're not paid enough for sure. One of the best paying jobs I ever had, I had quit from because management had a kiss up, kick down attitude, thought it was a good plant, but I didn't last long because of management. Yeah, I know that feeling all too well too, Hank. And just being present and being vulnerable and honest, but being able to figure things out goes a long way. Absolutely, Frank. And you guys, thank you for your comments. If you have any questions for Katie, feel free to ask those as well. Another shift that I'm seeing in our industry, Katie, is employee well-being and like work-life balance. So there's a ton of people that have different definitions of work-life balance, and I take this time off, but there's a lot of people that kind of blend the two together. So in your experience, how does supporting employee well-being really translate into business success? Because a lot of companies are considering making some changes to really help not just their full-time employees, but also their part-time. Like, I talked to a gentleman who has I think he said a 92% retention rate since he took over the company, because one of the changes that he made is he treats them like his full-time salaried employees. So they get the same amount of days off. They have flex hours. If they have something that comes up, if it's like within an hour or 2 hour time span, he lets them go take care of it without having to take time off. So they're still getting paid. And he is like, we don't work Fridays. But if they want to catch up on hours that they missed during the week, they're more than welcome to come in Friday. So like, how have you seen supporting the well-being of employees really turn into business success?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's definitely, I think, something that's kind of come about more recently. It's been interesting to see that kind of evolve throughout my career. But yeah, I mean, I think that case study you presented is like the perfect example. I think people really just want companies to understand that life can happen, like life things can happen. And I think maybe the fear from management is that people will take advantage of something like this, and then they'll just like come in late or take time off or whatever. But I think that fear is a little bit unfounded, because I think you're more likely to actually run into that if you have an inflexible point of view or an inflexible kind of management strategy, because people are going to start trying to steal time, or just they're so burnt out that they sleep in, right? And then you're going to run into that more. But if you're kind of proactive about it, and you're saying like, hey, I get that you might have to go to a doctor's appointment or something might come up with your kid and you have to go get them, then again, it's like they're going to want to work at your company if you're flexible like that, because right now that's kind of rare. And if people want to work at your company, they're going to show up as best they can when they can, right? So like, if someone's really motivated to work at your company because they're like, oh my gosh, we have this like great CEO and we have these flexible hours and like I'm not stressed about having to take time off for things, then they're going to want to come and put effort into that company as much as possible. So you're probably actually going to have more productivity if you kind of give people the time that they need, because I think you'll find that people don't take so much if they're happy, right? Like they're not
Mhm.
just hanging on until they can get their next vacation day, right? Like they're excited to come to work. Yeah, maybe they have to take a couple hours off, but I mean, I don't know. If anyone's worked even at any job really, but especially in manufacturing, it's like 2 hours of work for someone that's unmotivated is pretty much the same as 30 minutes of work for someone that is motivated, right? Like there's so
Yeah.
many ways you can just put things off or like go for a walk or whatever. And if you're motivated, it's like you can just work so much more efficiently. So I actually don't
Yeah.
think, I think if anything, you'll gain productivity from doing that, even if someone's working less hours.
Yeah. Well, and toxicity spreads, right? So if someone's completely miserable, it's going to affect the other employees around them that have to work with that individual. So why not support any kind of programs or, practices that really support healthy work-life balance? Do you have any recommendations or know of any programs that support healthy work-life balances? Because I know that some companies like partner up with other organizations. I worked with one company and I think they had like a yoga person come in every once in a while to like do stretching and stuff. Yeah, but I know there's like different things that you can do. Do you know any specifically?
I don't know any off the top of my head, but I think the biggest thing is just having that flex hour or the flex schedules. And
Mhm.
I'm definitely a big proponent of the 4-day work week as well. I think that there's countless studies out there, saying how much more efficient it is. And with manufacturing, you're working on a shift schedule anyway, so it should be doable to
Yeah.
accomplish that. So yeah, I think it's more about the flexibility in the hours. I mean, perks like that, like the yoga and stuff, are nice, but yeah, I definitely
Mhm.
think that just the flexibility, again, it speaks to the human side of things. Like we get that you're a person with a life. That's the most important.
Yeah. Well, I think too, one of the examples that I'm like always jealous of is in Europe. Like I think they only do
Mhm.
30 or 35-hour work weeks. And I'm like, how the hell do you pull that off? There's like,
Yeah.
it's just always been a thing. And every time I talk to one of my friends in Europe, it seems like they're on holiday or something, just doing whatever because they've already got all of their hours in. So I'm really like curious as to how they keep that working. But yeah, I think United States should definitely hop on that
Yeah.
bandwagon for that. We already talked about transparency and open communication to really empowering employees. So I think the other thing, in your experience, there's a lot of advancements happening, and you can't really have innovation if you don't have everybody on board sharing their ideas. So how does focusing on people really fuel innovation within companies? Like how we mentioned about productivity, but what about coming up with new ideas that lead to newer technologies? How does it fuel that portion of it?
Yeah, I love talking about this. I think, again, kind of going back to that same concept of just collecting as much data as possible from your employees. So
Mhm.
using that kind of bottom up approach can also really help with innovation because you have people that are really specialists in what they do. So one of my favorite questions to ask operators when I was working as a manufacturing engineer was, like, let's say that the physical limits of the world don't exist, or like there's no bureaucratic limitations to this. What would be your ideal process? Like, I don't care if you don't think it's actually feasible to do. I just want to know, in your perfect world, how would this process work, right? Maybe it means that something that's cut by a blade right now is cut by a laser. I don't care. Like, just tell me what it is. And I think fostering that kind of creativity among everyone can actually get you some really good ideas, because then you as the engineer can be like, okay, maybe the whole thing isn't possible, but there might be some part of this that actually could be possible that I didn't think of, because like
Mhm.
you're not going to have all the ideas in the world, right? And so it can be helpful to just gather as many ideas as possible, from as many people as possible that have different backgrounds from you, and then that can actually really open up your mind for innovation too, because a lot of innovation at the end of the day is just creativity, right? You're trying to come up with something that's never been done before, and that's really hard to do, especially just as one person.
Yeah.
And so I think that can be kind of a struggle in R&D too, because they kind of work in a silo to a certain extent, right? It's like people that have mostly worked in academia for most of their career, or they've worked in a lab for most of their career. And
Yeah.
so they are kind of the experts in that and in coming up with these things. But I think it can be helpful to expand your mind and expand your horizons by taking into account views and ideas of people with very different backgrounds from you. And then that could actually open up a new idea that you could figure out as someone in R&D that knows how all of the technical stuff works, but that you just maybe wouldn't have thought of otherwise. So
Yeah, I think that's a really good point too. And I'm going to bring up that company that I mentioned before, but Frank said 20 to 40 times. I don't know what that was in reference to. And then treat them like
flex
adults.
hours, yeah.
Flex hours when practical. Yeah, I think it's just hold on. I'm not showing that comment. That's off of Twitch. Sorry. Some people will put comments in here trying to sell me stuff during my episodes, and I'm like, that's not the time for this. Yeah, I just think flex hours would be really helpful, especially to parents who have young kids and they need to drop them off and pick them up at school. But the company that I mentioned before, where he started treating the part-time workers like the salary workers and gave them that flexibility. Another thing that he did was he opened up the conversation to a lot of the people on the floor about, okay, if you have an idea that can help us with any of our processes, just let us know. And one gentleman came in and said, hey, I have this idea to shorten up this time to make this product. And he's like, okay, tell you what, let's start making the changes and let's give it like 3 or 6 months, he said. And he was like, if we can reduce it and we can make money off of it, then we'll continue to do it this way. And they ended up reducing it by a certain amount of time and started making more money because of it. So he actually gave that employee a percentage of what that revenue was. And that was his bonus. So it's like, if you're giving that to the part-time employees, because you don't hear a lot of part-time employees get opportunities for bonuses, but if you are able to like invite them into that conversation, yeah, I would spit out an idea every single day. Like, even if it sounds dumb, I would, if I had that incentive or that chance, I think that'd be really cool. So I know you were talking about bottom up, but I do think some of this stuff will need to have the leadership involved. So is there any specific advice that you give leaders who are just beginning to really integrate more of this human-centered practice? Like, what sort of things are you telling them to take in consideration, and what should they do to really get started with this?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think probably the best way to get started culturally as a leader is to just empower your middle managers more. So tell them like, okay, we're shifting our culture, right? Like, we want this to be a more human-centered place. And I think that example you gave, whoever it is that runs that company, I would love to talk to them because that sounds amazing. And
I'll give you an introduction. His name is Fred. He's an awesome guy. He's on the East Coast, so I'll definitely give you an introduction.
Great. Yeah, I grew up on the East Coast, so yeah, we got that in common. But yeah, that's like the perfect example of, in a way, it kind of is bottom up leadership, because he's empowering everyone at the bottom to give you these ideas. And then, like I was mentioning earlier, he actually took actionable change from that idea. And then giving someone a percentage as a bonus is also genius, because yeah, why would you not say an idea every day if you knew that was a possibility, right? Like, that's the perfect way to get the ideas and empower your employees. And I'm sure that the retention there is extremely high. But yeah, so I think it starts with the relationship between executives and the middle managers, right? Like, I think in a more top-down sense, that can be a little bit contentious sometimes, because the middle managers hear all of the complaints and hear everything that's going on, with the people that they are in charge of. But I think sometimes they can feel a little bit powerless against the executives, and the executives just want to achieve their goal, and they're just like, well, you're the manager, so make it happen. So I think it really starts with improving that relationship and saying, we're shifting our mindset. Like, yes, we have these goals. We are still going to need to accomplish these goals, but we really want you to tell us, or, come up with strategies for us to make these goals happen. And then we can, come up with resources to give you and come up with new directions for the company as a result of that. Right. And so I think it starts with improving that relationship. And then from there, the relationship between the middle management and people on the floor and anyone else below them can be improved as well. But yeah, I think it really starts with that.
So looking ahead, what changes do you believe we'll start seeing at the corporate level and culture as more companies adopt some of these approaches? Like what do you see happening?
I think definitely changes in the pay structure motivation. So like what you mentioned, I think actually we might start seeing that model more. I think a big issue right now with companies is that a lot of times the motivations of the CEO is actually in conflict with the motivations of the rest of the company. It's kind of layoff time right now, right before the holidays, right? And so if there's layoffs at a company and that results in their profits being higher, that's going to lead to CEOs in a lot of cases getting bonuses, right? Because their revenue looks better, even though a bunch of people got laid off, and that probably really hurt the long-term strategy of the company because they lost a ton of knowledge from those people. And so in that way, I think just inherently, because the priorities are kind of conflicting, it can lead to companies struggling to keep up in the long term. Because if you have that, layoff rehire cycle, eventually people are not going to want to work for you anymore because it's not really seen as a company that respects their employees, and you're not going to have job security. I mean, a whole host of reasons, right? It's not going to be a good culture. So I think that companies that look much more in the long term and have this long-term vision of sustainable growth, so getting away from kind of the like spike in quarterly capital gains that people love to see, getting away from that and looking into more sustainable long-term growth, I think is really going to start to separate companies both in the market and also just culture-wise, right? Like I think companies that adopt this human-centered culture and prioritize retaining employees, I think those are the ones that are actually really going to be much more successful in the future.
So one of the topics that I always am interested in like researching more and reviewing, because automation is happening. Like everybody's going to be, if they're not already automating some part of their process, there it's going to happen eventually, right? Because we have this workforce issue. But there it is scaring a lot of the people that are on the floor or are in positions that they've been in for like the last 15 to 30 years. Like it is scaring a lot of those traditional workforce members, which causes some distrust, right? Like not just with management and leadership, but also with the sector as a whole. Like a lot of people don't think that they can enter this space because they feel like robots are going to take over their job. So what can companies do to really like mesh those two together so that they have the trust of their employees and understand that these are opportunities for you to still continue to grow in your career? Like how can they work around that stuff? Because I see that as a talking point a lot now, where we're trying to really regain the trust of some of these older generations, because technology is something they're really not interested in, or they're just scared, or they just have been working as long as they have and they don't want to learn anything new. So how can we mesh all of that together?
Yeah, I think probably the best way is, so one of the nice things about robots is that they can take over things that are dangerous, maybe for humans, or just something that you don't really want to do, kind of like the grunt work, so to speak. And so I think that's really the best way to approach it, is to, again, go to your operators. Hopefully you've fostered kind of a trusting relationship with them and say, what do you wish you didn't have to do, right? Maybe it's like lifting something really heavy. Maybe it's doing something where it's risky, like you might get burned, anything like that, which I'm sure many workstations are obviously safe, but everyone's got stuff they don't want to do, right, in any job. And there might be something that's just cumbersome, or it's not interesting, or it's monotonous, or something like that. And start with that. Say like, okay, if you don't want to do this, we're going to automate that part of the process, and we're going to use that time to find out what you are interested in and then empower you to do that, right? So maybe that's learning more about coding, or if you're not interested in technology, maybe it's learning more about leadership, or maybe that's helping R&D come up with new ideas. Like everyone's kind of good at something, and there's a chance that there's something that someone's interested in that they want to do with that company. And so it's finding, okay, we're freeing up your time by taking care of this task that's monotonous, you don't want to do it, cool, you don't have to do that anymore. that part's going to get automated. And then what would you like to spend your free time on, right? Like and then find out how they can add value to the company in that way, because that will also probably increase your productivity if you're empowering someone to do something that they're interested in that's still adding value to your company.
I like that, because I feel like that will make employees feel like they're not forgotten either, especially the older generation, where we're just kind of like, oh, we can't. Because I've actually heard some people say in some of the posts that they're making on social media, like, oh, just retire already. And it's like, you can't say that, because it's going to make them feel some type of way. And then they're just going to lose motivation and feel like they don't matter. And that's what we're trying to do here. Frank just said 2040 was in reference to the most productive employees can easily be 10 times more productive. Very much so. And then I like to say you actually don't want a job a robot can do. I reframe it as taking the robot out of the human. And I've been automating people's jobs for 30 plus years, and sometimes it is uncomfortable at first, but later I've had people come up and thank me. That's really cool, Frank. I would like to have a conversation with you sometime to learn more about that, because that sounds like an interesting and fun thing that you do. And I'm a nerd for information. So Katie, this has been really exciting, and I've really enjoyed you coming on to Mavens and sharing your story. What can we expect from you and ArmstrongLin? Like, what's in the future for you? What can we look forward to seeing coming from you guys?
Yeah, so we're really just looking to help, any companies, particularly startups, small companies, improve their operations, improve their scale up. We've been trying to work a lot more in green tech because we're both kind of passionate about climate change, saving the environment. And so we want to really help enable some of these technologies. So, if you work at a startup where it's kind of started by mostly academics and you want some people with industry experience to come in and help you set up your system so that you can scale up and avoid as many huge blow up problems as possible, then that's kind of what we want to help do. So yeah, that's awesome. What you'll see us doing.
Are you going to be at any trade shows, upcoming trade shows?
Upcoming. So I think I've finished out my last conference of the year. So I won't be at any trade shows, but I will definitely keep you posted if I'm going to some.
Yeah, keep us up to date to that. Well, what's the best before I ask you my last question, I want to know what the best way is to reach you. If anybody has any questions, where should they go and how should they connect with you?
Yeah, thanks. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and send me a message, and then also follow our page on LinkedIn, ArmstrongLin Optimal Solutions. You can also go to our website, which is ArmstrongLin.com, and send us a message through there. But yeah, really any platform, we're just a small shop. So feel free to shoot us a message and we'll be happy to talk to you.
Very cool. Well, Katie, before I let you go, if you had one ask for our audience who is tuning in, what would your ask be for them?
I would say maybe today while you're at work, go talk to someone that you have not talked to before and ask them the most annoying part of their day. And you'll learn something new.
Love that. So I would take it a step further to ask someone from the older generation and then ask someone from a younger generation and see how their answers compare, because it might be a little bit different. Well, Katie, thank you so much for tuning in to Frank and Hank, who have been that rhymes. Sorry, Frank and Hank. But thank you for your comments in the section below. Be sure to reach out to Katie and ask her questions. It seems like a really cool company that's really empowering employees, which we need more of, especially now in engineering and manufacturing. So we appreciate all the hard work you and your partner are doing, Katie. And please stay tuned. We have a sponsor video coming up for Fresh Horizons. If you are having difficulties, putting some edge on your merch, reach out to them, because they make all my merch and they're really cool and they're a nice family. And I just love them to death because they empower your brand is all I'm going to say. So have a great weekend, everybody, and stay safe. Talk to you later. Bye.
Thanks.
This episode of Mavens has been sponsored by Fresh Horizons Group. Fresh Horizons Group is a family-run company that was founded on the premise of helping organizations and businesses better tell their story through high-quality branded apparel and promotional items. Freshen up your brand by contacting Fresh Horizons today at freshhorizonsgroup.com.